Michael is always a good bet.
No, I am definitely not Michael. I checked and everything.
How does one check if one's Michael?
Careful self-examination. I'm not nearly a nice enough human being to be a Michael. All the Michaels here are adorable people.
And you're not?
Nope. I aspire to be better, but no, sadly not.
Oh dear. I got another package of spoons today.
Ooh.
So they are all now being put into envelopes and will go in the post when it stops raining.
That's quite
I can go to the post office.
I have been working on Storytime themed leather drinks coasters for lack of an idea for something to work on my leather working, but they're not coming out great so far.
Oh.
Getting better though. I haven't done any in years. So.
Well, there's nothing you can ask more than just to get better.
My dragon is recognisably a dragon now, so I'm definitely better than I was a week ago.
Well, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, gorgeous.
Hey, how are you doing?
Not bad. I just showed Nick Mulan for the first time.
The original or the live action?
The original, obviously.
Good. What do you think, Nick?
It was all right.
I don't think I've seen Mulan. I might have seen Mulan. Definitely sung Mulan at karaoke.
It was one of the Disney films that came out when I was exactly the right age for it. And also happened to be on TV, and all our films growing up were ones that were taped off the TV. So
it's a bit too late for me.
That's how I feel about most Disney. If you didn't get the it at the right age, the nostalgia thing just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you're forever like missing out on everyone's cultural like touchstones.
I feel like that with things like Harry Potter.
I was the right age and into Harry Potter, so like I think I read the first one when I was about 9 and the last one came out as I finished school. So
and Rada.
Hello.
I am likely to have spare spoons if anyone still wants a spoon and hasn't ordered one.
tempting, but also I definitely don't need one.
Very square edges.
I mean, they're not unpleasant to be in your mouth.
Excuse me?
I tried it with some Biscoff just to make sure.
Excuse me?
No, you're not. You should have been here earlier if you wanted context.
Context is for suckers. I don't want context when I arrive to sentences like that. Also, hello everybody.
Hi.
Hi. Oh. There we go. How is everybody doing?
All right.
Yeah. What are you sticking, Katie?
I am sending off more spoons.
How exciting!
Well, I'm not sending off more spoons. I'm putting more spoons into envelopes. Then when I get around to going to the post office, I will send off more spoons.
That is wise.
Because this batch of spoons is mostly for people who live in other countries and therefore need post offices.
Ooh. Export spoons.
Have you got any tips for things actually getting there? Because I've never sent anything successfully to the other side of the Atlantic.
I just put it in an envelope and said, "Can I send this to Canada, please?" And they said yes.
And it got there?
And it got there.
See, that's where mine went wrong.
And has their badges, I believe.
Yeah, I've always managed to send posts. I've never had anything go missing. Like so far. Fingers crossed.
In a couple of weeks, in a few weeks, I'm going to Germany. So if they can be delayed, I can take stuff across.
You already have Jenny's spoon, don't you?
No. Oh, Jenny's. If it was sent, possibly I do. It might not have arrived at my address here yet. But yes.
I mean, I sent it like a month ago.
I have an envelope for Jenny. I haven't opened it, so I don't actually know what it is.
Okay. It might be a spoon.
Okay.
Hi, people.
Hello,
Hey,
Lottie.
hey, Ariane.
Hey, Ariane. Also, hi, everybody. Hi, Duncan. Hi, Bina. Hi, Katie and Nick. Hi, Kim. Hi, Mike. Hi, Andrada. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Evan. Hi, Ariane. Hi.
How are you, Ariane? All
Hi,
right.
Jen.
I'm good. Today was good. I went to work. It's been a long time. I've had
Wow. Okay. How was that?
Exciting.
for 3 hours.
Blimey. Yeah. That's a
How you
huge
feeling?
change, though, isn't it? Did you survive? Okay.
Yeah, it was good. I survived. It was just
Good.
really tiring, but
Yeah. Yeah. I bet. Yeah.
I survived.
Those pajamas are cute as hell.
And yeah, tomorrow's rest day, and then I'm working
Good.
again Wednesday afternoon.
Excellent. Very nice. Ooh, Jen, what's that? That looks nice. Is it cake?
No, it's Christmas cards.
Oh, that's
Sorry.
still lovely and exciting. I saw the kind of like square white cardboard box, and
And the little oops as it comes off.
yeah, I thought it must be. I've been really craving cake today. Like I want something sweet. I want ice cream or chocolate mousse, or I want a pudding is what I want.
Yeah.
And
A bunch of Biscoff in the post.
I've got so much Biscoff. Don't encourage me to just eat Biscoff with a spoon, because I will. And I have three jars of Biscoff in the house now, plus two like part packets of Biscoff biscuits.
And you do know that saying that you're craving cake is the best way to manifest cake in the post in 3 days. This is not a safe thing to say in the Storytime crowd.
But also, thank you for reminding me that I have cake that I forgot I had.
Oh my God. Oh, well, and that is a public service that I'm always happy to provide. If anybody else here has cake that they had forgotten about, don't forget about that cake you've got. It's very important not to forget about the cake. We've got Kitty and Rory. Hi, Kitty and Rory. Are you eating cake?
Flapjacks? Yeah.
Count.
Got a lot of pine nuts in it. Really nice.
I was having a little look over my my kind of sort of archived list of recipes that I've ever found, and there was a recipe in there for pine nut and rosemary brittle that I think I was going to like make people for Christmas presents one year and just didn't. But how good does that sound?
Oh my God! If you can find that recipe, I would be very interested.
I will.
It would be a very good one for the newsletter.
It would. Where did this come? I've never done this in my life. Oh, I don't know if I like it. Oh, just don't let me do that again. Finger guns is one thing, but this.
Okay. Only finger guns. Only finger guns are bad. Hi.
Hello, person behind him.
This is Alex. He's gonna go.
Hi, Alex. Can we meet Alex?
Hello. It's nice to meet you.
Nice not to see you.
I prefer my game.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to
I
meet
love
you.
the idea that we would just see Alex like as a torso. Like you only see the legs in Tom and Jerry.
Yeah, it's got kind of a Charlie Brown flavor to it. Like,
That's so
I was like, is M sitting down, or is this person just stratospherically tall? Or both?
He's very tall. Yes, very, very, tall.
Is he Latvian?
Hmm?
Is he Latvian for people who were on the after chat last week?
No, he is very, very English, actually.
Why Latvian?
Why Latvian?
We were discussing bad graphs the other night, and there's one with giant Latvian women and tiny Indian women.
I think I've seen that one. Because the y-axis like shows a portion and doesn't show everything underneath the graph going down to 0.
Nice. Yeah. Hi, Sean. Hi, Tal.
Hi.
Hello. What else have we got? Hi, Mike. Hi, Martin. Hi, Ian. Ah. Ooh. Oh, I can't believe it's nearly the end of this. I'm so sad. Should we just go back and do this one again?
Yeah. No, I'm so excited for Feet of Clay.
Yeah.
I even read Guards, and Men at Arms so that I would be ready and primed for Feet of Clay.
Gold star. Gold star, top of the class. Also, Jen, your hair looks lovely.
Thank you. I don't know what I did to it the weekend, but it seems really happy. I don't know if I can keep it.
It's so shiny and glossy.
I know.
Oh, it looks really nice. It looks really nice to touch. Like when you just kind of like put your fingers into a little bit and it was like, oh God, that's like Disney princess hair.
I was gonna say either like Disney princess hair or like a magical woodland creature hair.
Oh, love it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Hi, Carmen.
Guys, you just be so nice to me today.
We love you. Whenever you need people to be nice to you or just like want it, just let us know. We'll shower you with compliments.
Any excuse. We're all just giant wibbly sacks of loosely contained love, and I just want a little poke. Yeah, Kitty. Yeah, you make that face of horror. I'm not taking that back. I'm leaving that out there. That's what I'm gonna do. Oh God. Well, I'm exhausted now. Good night. Good night, everybody. Can I hear something?
It's story time.
Okay. Now, quick hello to the catch-up crew, which at some point I think will include Lisa and Jonas. So Lisa and Jonas, whenever you are watching this, we love you. And also all of the rest of the catch-up crew, we adore you. Now. Hi, Abby. Okay. It's story time. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. So we'll go back a little. He'd made it halfway across the valley when the jackals descended. Frenzied by the smell of blood, they ignored the horse's kicks and pulled Ibn Malik screaming from its side. With the last dregs of his energy, he fought a few of them off. The rest, sensing his exhaustion, vaulted the charred bodies of their packmates and tore out his throat. For all the wizard's strength and power, the jackals found he made rather a small meal. The desert is a vast and empty place, and travellers are few and far between. The gnawed bones of Wahab ibn Malik bleached and cracked in the sun. His cloak dissolved into scattered shreds. The copper flask lay tipped on its side. It gathered a light covering of dust, but it did not tarnish. Animals sniffed at it, then left it alone. In faraway cities, caliphs rose and were overthrown. Waves of invading armies fell upon the deserts, made their brief mark, and were conquered in their turn. One day, long after the last traces of Ibn Malik had vanished from the desert, a caravan outrider stopped by a sheltering rock to relieve himself. The caravan was 20 days out for Ramadi and bound for Asham. The outrider was tasked with ensuring there would be no surprises along the way, no raiders or mercenaries demanding payment for safe passage. He took a drink from his water skin and was about to mount his horse again when a glint of metal caught his eye. In a small depression in the ground lay a copper flask, half buried in dust and scrub. He picked up the flask and brushed the dirt away. It was well made and handsome, with an interesting pattern of scrollwork around its base. Perhaps it had been lost from an earlier caravan. He thought it was the sort of thing his mother might like. He placed the flask in his saddlebag and rode on. Over the years, the flask passed from hand to hand, from son to mother to niece to daughter-in-law. It was used to hold oil or frankincense, or simply for decoration. It accumulated a few small dents, but was never seriously damaged, even when it should have been. Once in a while, its owner would notice that it always seemed warm to the touch, but then the thought would pass, as such idle thoughts always do. Down the generations the flask went, until at last it was placed in the luggage of a young woman bound from Beirut to New York, a gift from her mother to remember her by. And as for Ibn Malik, "You are bound to me, fire to flesh, soul to soul, and sealed in blood for as long as you shall live." The wizard had been canny and devious in life, but in death he'd outsmarted even himself. Soul to soul they were bound, as long as the Djinni should live. And there the Djinni sat, trapped in his flask, living out a millennium in one eternal moment. Which meant that death was not the end for Wahab ibn Malik al-Hadid. The morning after the jackals devoured the wizard's carcass down to the bones, a child was born in a faraway eastern land in a city called Chang'an. His parents named him Gao. From the beginning, Gao was a clever boy. As he grew, he soon outpaced his tutors, who began fretting that perhaps the boy was too clever. By 13, he had written several treatises on inconsistencies in the most beloved Confucian teachings, declaring them bankrupt and meaningless. By 20, Gao had become a brilliant, embittered outcast. He apprenticed himself to a herbalist and grew obsessed with developing a medicinal formula for immortality. He died at 38 by accident from one of his self-administered experiments. The day after his death, a baby was born to joyful parents in the floating Byzantine city of Venezia. Tommaso, as he was called, proved so interested in the Holy Church and its mysteries that he was quickly set on the path to priesthood. He took orders at a young age and soon immersed himself in politics, rising to spiritual advisor to the Doge. It was clear to all that Tommaso would be satisfied with nothing less than the papal robes, until he was observed one evening in one of the city's catacombs, conducting what appeared to be dark and pagan rites. Tommaso was excommunicated, tried for sorcery, and burned at the stake. Tommaso's ashes were still glowing in Venezia when, in Varanasi, a boy named Jayatun was born within sight of the river Ganga. Jayatun loved the stories and legends that he had heard as a child, particularly that of the Kintamani, a fabulous jewel that would grant its owner any wish and could even hold back death. When he grew older, what had been a youthful fascination became an obsession, and he set about collecting every mention he could find of the Kintamani, be the source Buddhist or Hindu or mere storyteller's fancy. The search devoured all else, and he'd long since become a friendless pauper when one day, under the influence of a high fever, he waded into the Ganga and drowned, convinced that the river goddess had left the Kintamani there for him to find. And so it went. As the Djinni's flask was passed from hand to hand, so too did Ibn Malik's soul pass from body to body, in one part of the world and then another. He was a crusader at the siege of Jerusalem, looking for holy relics to steal. He was a student of Paracelsus, devoted to finding the philosopher's stone. He was a Shinto monk, a Maori shaman, an infamous courtier in the House of Orleans. He never married, never fathered children, never so much as fell in love. Presented with a religious tradition, he was drawn to its darkest, most mystical corners. In politics, he displayed an unwavering taste for power. His lives were unusually unhappy and rarely ended well. But in each and every one, he grew consumed with finding the secret to eternal life, not knowing that it was the one thing he already possessed. Centuries went by in this way, with Ibn Malik's soul unable to pass to the next world, not so long as the Djinni still lived. Until at last, in a Prussian shtetl, a squalling infant named Yehuda was placed in his mother's arms. The Djinni saw all of this. He saw himself trapped in the flask, howling in anguish. He saw Ibn Malik born again and again. He saw Yehuda Shalman, the last of Ibn Malik's incarnations and the most powerful. He watched as the boy grew from student to convict to master of forbidden magic. And he watched as a lonely furniture maker came to Shalman's door one day in search of a golem to make him a wife. And Shalman saw all of it as well. He saw his own lives laid before him, misshapen pearls on an endless string, starting with Ibn Malik and ending with himself. He saw the Djinni's memories, experienced his capture and defeat. He saw him emerge from the flask in a tinsmith's shop, a hole in his memory where the Bedouin girl had been. He saw the Djinni learn his way about the city and grow accustomed to his bonds. And he watched as one night the Djinni crossed paths with a strange and astonishing woman, a woman made of clay. Chapter 26. Someone was slapping the Djinni's face. He opened his eyes and saw Conroy standing over him, blood trickling from his scalp. So it was real. The truth of it hit him full on, the remorseless knowledge of what he'd done. He turned onto his side and curled around the pain, as he'd done on the blood-stained floor of his palace 1,000 years before. He heard women screaming. There were shouts for a policeman, a fire engine. "Ahmad," Conroy was saying urgently. "Come on, boyo, get up." Someone else groaned from close nearby. The wizard. The Djinni lurched to his feet, swaying against Conroy. Fragments of glass slid tinkling from his clothing, joining the shards that carpeted the tiny shop. The old man lay slumped next to a display case, his body dusted with glass and tobacco. The Djinni grabbed him, dragged him up off the floor. "Release me," he shouted. The old man's head lolled on his neck. It would be so very easy to kill him, only a quick motion, one hand to his bare throat, a fitting end after what he'd done to Fadwa. But the binding between them would still remain, and tomorrow in some distant land, another child would be born. With a cry of anguish and frustration, the Djinni dropped Charlemagne to the ground. The old man crumpled to the floorboards, his head knocking the side of the tobacco display. Conroy's hand was on his arm. "The police will be here any moment," he said. If he felt any alarm at the Djinni's ill treatment of a small and elderly man, he didn't show it. The Djinni glanced about at the shattered windows and the crowd that had gathered outside. The prostitutes from upstairs had all run panicked into the street in various states of undress. Conroy's men were forming a cordon in front of the door, holding everyone back as they tried to surge forward. "The police," he said. "Your shop." Distantly, he recalled that he'd gone there intending to rob the man. "Don't worry about me," Conroy said. "Constables and I have a long history together. But what about our friend here? What's to be done with him?" The Djinni looked down at the old man sprawled on the floor. "Fire to flesh," he thought, "soul to soul for as long as you shall live." He knew what it was he had to do. "This man is dangerous and a murderer," he said to Conroy. "He killed a girl I once knew. She was only 15 years old." He wavered, braced himself against a countertop. "I can't let the police find me here. There's something I need to do to set things right." Conroy eyed the Djinni for a moment, considering. Then he leaned down and punched the unconscious Charlemagne across the face. "The constables will deal with him," said the fence. "And as far as I'm concerned, you were never here. Go now, out the back." Until the moment of the blast, Salah had been roaming the Bowery sidewalks, wondering how long he could pretend to himself that he was not, in fact, looking for the Djinni. He gazed into 1,000 faces, grinning with delight at each and receiving a few suspicious looks in return. Still, none had that familiar glow like a shaded lamp. But would Salah still recognize the glowing man now that his vision was restored? He was looking about with growing agitation when the explosion rang through the street. He felt it a moment later, a wave of pressure against his back, knocking him forward. All gasped and turned, then cried out at the falling glass. He ran forward with the surging crowd. It was a tobacconist's shop, nondescript, and he could see no one inside. But still, could he not guess? After the day's events, it could hardly be a coincidence. He strained to see over the heads of the hard-looking men who'd formed a protective chain, pushing them back. The crowd was calling out for the authorities, buzzing excitedly about bombs and anarchists. A half-naked woman fell against him. He put out a hand to steady her, and she slapped it away. There, at the alley entrance, it was the Djinni, who, Salah saw with surprise, still glowed, if only barely. Some part of his illness still remained then, or perhaps it was a permanent remnant, like a poxmark. The Djinni was covered with what looked like powdered glass, which added its own eerie shimmer to his appearance. Salah watched as he cut through the crowd and headed south, away from the fracas. Instead of his usual arrogant bearing, he seemed unsteady, even haunted. What else could Salah do but follow? For the most part, the Christie Street tenements were still asleep as the Djinni passed them by, the grey facades stony in their silence. As he walked, his new memories rose up and threatened to crush him. It seemed impossible. If a passerby had whispered the name Fadwa al-Hadid in his ear only an hour earlier, he'd have had no inkling of its significance. There was little time. He knew that neither Conroy nor the police could hold Charlemagne for long. Even this small errand was a luxury he probably couldn't afford. But he had made a promise once, in a glittering gaslit ballroom, and he meant to keep it. He found the tenement, walked down the noxious hallway to the windowless, claustrophobic room and knocked on the door. "Anna, please," he told the half-awake girl who'd answered it. A minute later, Anna slipped out into the hallway, scowling, arms folded above her burgeoning stomach. But when she saw his expression, her own turned apprehensive.
"What is it? What's happened?"
"I apologize for waking you," he said to her, "but I need you to deliver a message." He left Anna's tenement and walked into the slowly brightening day. Overhead, the morning's first trains creaked uptown, shedding the evening soot onto the streets below. He would have preferred to walk, but the Second Avenue elevated would be faster. He was almost at the Grand Street platform when he realised he'd been hearing the same pair of footsteps behind him for blocks. He whipped around, and a familiar figure busied itself at a nearby milliner's window, as though admiring the summer fashions. The Djinni waited, half amused, until the man at last gave up the pretense. "I was better at following you when I couldn't see," Salah said. "Now everything is a distraction." The Djinni looked him over. The man's clothes were as awful as ever, but there was a new straightness and energy to his figure, as though he no longer gazed at the world slantwise. "What's happened to you?" the Djinni asked. Salah shrugged. "Perhaps I simply recovered from my illness." "I told you that was no illness." "Then call it an injury." "Salah, why are you following me?" "There's a man looking for you," the man said. "I don't think he means you well." "I know," the Djinni said. "He already found me." "At the tobacconist's." "You were there?" "I was in the mood for a walk." The Djinni snorted. "And will you go home again now that you've delivered your belated news? Or would you prefer to shadow me throughout the city?" "That depends. Are you going somewhere interesting?" The Djinni had meant to make the trip alone, but now he thought that perhaps this man's company would not be so onerous. "Do you remember when I took you on the elevated?" he asked. "Not well. I wasn't at my best that night." "Then you should ride it again." The creaking train drew to a halt, and Salah stepped into the near-empty car, gazing around with nervous excitement. The Djinni couldn't help but smile, watching him. No doubt the wizard had something to do with the man's recovery, the removal of the spark from his mind, but the Djinni didn't intend to press him for details. It hardly mattered, as long as the man didn't try to stop him. They sat near the back. Salah jumped as the train took off with its customary jolt. The Djinni watched the familiar terrain as it rushed by, catching glimpses of the city's morning tableau. Children dashing across the rooftops, couples drinking tea at their windows. His face spasmed once in sorrow. He closed his eyes, leaned back his head. "May I ask where we're going?" Salah said. "Central Park," replied the Djinni. "I'm meeting a woman there." Radzin's bakery was an eerie place at 4 a.m. The Golem let herself in with the key Mrs. Radzin had given her for emergencies and bolted the door behind her. She knew every pace of the floor, could have made the morning's breads with her eyes closed. Yet in the darkness, the bakery felt ominous. The familiar work table stood aloof and tomb-like. Streetlight shone through the empty display case, illuminating ghostly handprints. There'd be nowhere else for her to go. Her home was no longer hers, and she couldn't risk meeting Michael again, not in his current state. Perhaps she'd never see him again. The rabbi, the Djinni, Anna, and now Michael, all gone from her life. From her cloak, she took the burnt sheaf of papers she'd stolen from Michael's desk. She placed it on her work table and stared at it. She wanted to run as far away from it as she could. She wanted to thrust it into the oven and forget she'd ever found it. Joseph Scholl was her creator. Again, she saw the sleek, almost preening smile, felt the sinister void in his mind. Even if she burned the pages to cinders, she wouldn't soon forget the grocery list of Rotfeld's desires in a wife. It was edifying, in a sense, to see her own origins, but at the same time she felt humiliated, reduced to nothing more than words. The request for modest behaviour, for example. It rankled her to think of her arguments with the Djinni on the subject, how fervently she defended an opinion she'd had no choice but to believe. And if she was meant to be curious, did that mean she could take no credit for her own discoveries, her accomplishments? Had she nothing of her own, only what Joseph Scholl decreed she should have? And yet, if Rotfeld had lived, she would have been more than content. She will make him an admirable wife if she doesn't destroy him first. So he'd known the danger and built her anyway. All else she might be able to understand someday, but this? What sort of man created a murderous creature and called it fine? The rabbi had said it himself the day they met. Whoever made you was brilliant and reckless and quite amoral. He'd hidden himself in the sheltering house, in plain sight. He'd walked her down her boarding house staircase, led her like a parent to her groom. Had he known Rotfeld was dead and followed her to America simply to toy with her, to lurk sadistic and grinning at the edges of her life? Why else would Michael have Scholl's spells if Scholl had not given them to him, so that Michael might discover the truth? And now the spells were hers. She wondered what form Joseph Scholl's anger would take when he found them missing. But then, perhaps she could yield his own weapon against him. The spells were Scholl's, yes, and he had done terrible things with them. But they could not be evil on their own, no more than, say, a knife that might be used to slice bread as well as injure a man. All must depend on the wielder and the intent. Hesitantly, she began to turn the pages. She found a diagram Scholl had drawn, describing how to hide one's thoughts. So that question at least was answered. Another formula described a process for erasing oneself from another's memory, and this one raised possibilities. With it, she could make Scholl forget she existed. She imagined him wandering the city bewildered, wondering what had possessed him to leave Europe. As a solution, it held a certain elegance. It even avoided violence. Likely it was no more than he deserved. A thought struck her, and she hesitated over the formula, considering. Could she remove herself from Michael's mind as well? Maybe it would be a kindness to make him forget he'd ever had a wife, to soothe away his fearful vision of her, the dark and hulking monster. Without her, Michael could go back to being the man she'd once met, weary but optimistic, bent on improving his small corner of the world. What better use for Joseph Scholl's knowledge than to undo the damage that his creation had caused? A bud of hope, so long absent, began to grow inside her, fed by the prospect of correcting her mistakes. On the next page, she found a charm for healing the injured, with nothing but a herb and a touch. She could find Irving Wasserman, repair the harm she'd done to him. The thought made her feel almost physically lighter. She could find Anna as well, and remove her memory of that night. But then, might Anna reunite with Irving without the memory to warn her away? Already she could see the risk of unintended consequences. On another page, she found instructions labelled to influence another's thoughts. Well, here was the solution. She would convince Anna that the man was not right for her, certainly this was the truth, and perhaps steer her towards more sensible conduct in the future. She turned more pages. To erase love's infatuation, she read, and thought of all those dejected souls who'd passed under her window, trapped in unrequited longings. To create abundant sustenance. No need to steal knishes when she could feed the hungry from thin air. To locate a person's whereabouts, to attract good fortune. The list went on, deluging her in possibilities. She marvelled at how much pain she could remove from the world. And Joseph Scholl had thought only to create golems. What of the Djinni? Could she remove his pain as well? She flipped the pages, searching. Perhaps she could unlock the cuff on his wrist and release him from his bonds. But then if he were freed, would he be content to stay? No, of course not. She would regain him for only the briefest of moments, and then he would leave her, abandoning the city and returning home. The thought wrenched her. She imagined him wandering the desert, searching always for the next distraction. Even released from his bonds, he would be no more at peace. He would carry his longings and dissatisfactions with him. In this, he was no different from anyone else. But now she could change him. She could make him content to stay in New York, content even with the life of a human. Would it not be a kindness, an act of love, to remove the haunted look from his eye, the bitterness from his voice? She would give him happiness, true happiness, such as she herself had once felt. No. With an effort, she flung the stack of papers away. They fluttered apart and scattered to the floor, stirring up tiny whirlwinds of flour. A tide of exhilaration drained from her, leaving her exhausted and heartsick. She would have bound the entire city, made them all into her golems to satisfy her own need to be useful. She would have robbed the Djinni of himself more thoroughly than the cuff on his wrist. He who valued his freedom above all else. She swept the pages into a pile, then rummaged in the back room for a flour sack to hide them in. Their contents were far too dangerous to contemplate using. If she must confront Joseph Scholl, she would need to find another way. There was a tap at the front door. She ignored it. Customers often tried to get in early, and considered what to do next. She wanted to burn the sack and its contents to cinders, but did she have the right to destroy such knowledge, regardless of where it came from? The tap came again, more urgent now. Irritated, she went to the door and lifted the shade, and saw a familiar woman, deeply pregnant, in a cheap and garish cloak. Anna, the golem said, astonished. By the time Salah and the Djinni disembarked in 57th Street, the New York morning had well and truly begun. Each avenue was an obstacle course of grocers' wagons and ice trucks out on the day's first deliveries. The oppressive heat had cleared somewhat. The horses pranced with energy, and the men at the reins whistled in piercing notes. "I remember this neighborhood," Salah said as they crossed Fifth Avenue. "At least, I think I do." He was doing his best to keep up with the Djinni, who had begun to walk with increased urgency. He'd spoken no more of his appointment, and Salah had decided not to ask, for the morning splendour had rendered all else irrelevant. Had the sky in Homs ever been this deep, this rich a blue? It was as though the city were giving him its finest dawn to make up for all the years of skies as grey as a chipped nickel. He remembered his patients telling him they appreciated the world anew once they were healed, a sentiment that had struck him as unbearably mawkish. But now a young girl passed by with a basket of flowers for sale, and the delicate beauty of her figure nearly made him break into tears. They turned into the park along the carriage drive. Already Saleh could hear the trees whispering, feel the cool breath of water in the air. It had been a day since he'd truly slept or eaten, but for the moment his fatigue was a minor matter, easy to ignore. The odd carriage passed them once or twice, but it was too early for the usual park-goers. The working classes were readying for the day, and the more genteel pedestrians were still abed. For the most part, it seemed, they had the place to themselves. The Djinni glanced across at his companion as they walked. "You've said little," he remarked. "I've been appreciating the morning." The Djinni glanced upward, as though noticing the fine weather for the first time. He did not smile, but seemed pleased nonetheless. Saleh gazed at the buildings that rimmed the park, rising above the trees. "I like this view better than last time," he said. The Djinni smiled thinly. "As you said, you weren't at your best." Saleh thought of the mansion on Fifth Avenue, the frost-rimed garden. "I believe you were visiting a woman that night as well." "A different woman," the Djinni said. Something seemed to occur to him then. He paused, shook his head as though ashamed, and then said, "Should you ever find yourself there again, I'd appreciate it if you called on Sophia Winston and conveyed my apologies for my behaviour." "Me?" The image of himself knocking at the mansion's gigantic front door made him want to laugh. Did the Djinni realise he didn't even speak English? "Is there anyone else to whom I should make your apologies?" "Oh, many others. But I'll burden you only with Sophia." From the carriage drive, they turned onto a broad path overarched by rows of gigantic, sheltering trees. They passed statuary of serious-faced men, poets or philosophers judging by the books and quills they held, their plaintive eyes cast heavenward. Their sculpted faces jogged Saleh's memory, and he pulled the small silver figurine from his pocket. "I found this in your room," he said. "It intrigued me." He held it out, but the Djinni said, "Keep it. The silver has value, at least." "You'd have me melt it down?" "It's a failure," the Djinni said. "There's no likeness." "There's some," Saleh said. "And why must there be a likeness? Perhaps it's a portrait of an entirely new animal." The Djinni snorted at this. The rows of trees seemed to be ending. Before them, the path dipped to a set of stairs that ran below a bridge. And below the bridge, Saleh could now see a figure rising, coming clearer with each step. A statue of a woman, her head bowed in shadow between an outstretched pair of wings. "I saw her that night," he said, more to himself than his companion. "I thought she was the angel of death, coming for me." He felt the Djinni flinch beside him. He turned, a question forming on his lips, and glimpsed the Djinni's rising fist, and beyond it his faintly glowing face, his eyes full of a grim apology. Anna was breathing hard, as though she'd been hurrying. She looked angry, stubborn, and terrified all at once.
"I told myself I'd never go near you again," she said.
A pause.
"Are you going to let me in?"
The golem ushered her in and closed the door, trying to keep her distance. Anna's fear of her was palpable. The girl was watching her carefully.
"I didn't expect you to be here already," she said. "I was going to wait."
"Anna," the golem said, "I am so very sorry. I know it changes nothing, but—"
"Not now," said Anna, impatient. "There's something wrong with Ahmad."
The golem gaped at her. "You've seen him?"
"He was just at my building with a message for you."
"But he came to you. How did he know where—"
That's not important, Anna said quickly. She fished in her pocket and drew out a piece of paper. I wrote down what he told me as close as I could remember. She held it out. Tell Hava that she is in danger from a man who calls himself Joseph Scholl. He is her creator and my master. It will sound impossible, but it's true. She must get as far away from him as she can. Leave the city if possible. Tell her she was right. There were consequences to my actions, and I never saw them. I stole something from her once because I wanted no harm to come to her, but I had no right to do so. Please give it back and tell her I said goodbye. Here, the girl said, and handed her another square of folded paper, one whose dimensions the golem knew by heart. He'd stolen it from her? And he'd crossed paths with Joseph Scholl as well? She had this disorienting sense of important events happening elsewhere while her back was turned. She replaced the square of folded paper in her locket and then read the Djinni's message again, trying to make sense of it. This time she saw what she'd missed in her confusion, the underlying notes of desperation and resolve. He was not simply leaving town. Oh God, she said, aghast. Anna, did he say what he was planning? He wouldn't tell me. But Chava, he looked terrible, like he was going to do something awful.
To himself? She wanted to ask, but didn't need to. Anna's mind had provided the answer in fearful visions of ropes and guns and bottles of laudanum. No, she couldn't believe he would do such a thing. But was that why he'd returned the paper? Because he'd chosen an action he'd once denied her? A breath of panic touched her. The Djinni's veiled mind would have told her no more than the note. But could she not guess? It would not be poison, or a rope, or a gun. It would be water. Which direction did he go? Was it east, towards the river? But Anna just shook her head, baffled. It might already be too late. The burnt pages were calling to her from inside their flour sack. Hadn't there been a formula titled to locate a person's whereabouts? Surely she could risk using Scholl's magic just this once. She grabbed the flour sack, was about to spill its contents onto the floor, and then stopped. Wait, she told herself. Think. The Djinni would never choose the East River docks, or the oil-stained waters of the bay, or anywhere else so inelegant. She didn't need forbidden diagrams or formulae to tell her his destination. She knew. She knew him. But what about the pages? She couldn't leave them at the bakery. She needed to hide them from Scholl, somewhere he'd never go. Pressing the sack into Anna's arms, she said, "Take this and hide it somewhere no one would think to look. A place only you know about. No, don't tell me where, don't even think it."
What? Hava, do you know how hard it is not to think about something?
Just don't. Don't look at it and don't tell a soul. Do you understand?
I don't understand any of this, the girl said, plaintive.
Promise me.
All right, I promise, if it's that important.
It is, the golem said, relieved. Thank you, Anna. And then she ran. Out the back door and up the fire escape to the roof, chasing after the Djinni as fast as she could. The Djinni caught Salah as he fell and carried him to a nearby bench. Merely another vagrant sleeping away the morning. He made certain the man was still breathing and then walked on, descending the stairway to the arched and columned darkness of the arcade. His steps echoed off the tiled walls, and then he was out in the sunlight again, crossing the terrace's broad expanse of red brick, coming to the fountain's rim. The angel of the waters gazed down at him, patient,
waiting. The terrace was all but deserted. Only a few men could be seen hurrying home after their dubious nighttime activities, using the park as a shortcut. Hat brims low over their faces, they walked with that hunched defiance against sleep that the Golem had once remarked on. They would not pose a problem. The fountain stood quiet, its dancing jets silenced. There was little noise at all, save for the lapping of the water. He had the strange impulse to take off his shoes, and so he did, lining them up next to the fountain's edge. For a moment he thought to run back to Salah and wake him, to tell him that yes, there were many people who deserved apologies. Arbili for one, and young Matthew, and Sam Hosseini for not finishing his necklaces. But time was passing, and it would be one indulgence too many. Besides, he'd taken care of the most important apology when he'd knocked on Anna's door. He looked up at the angel again, at her face full of compassionate concern. There was a resemblance, he decided. The plain yet pleasing features, the set of her lips, the wave of her hair. It gave some comfort, at least. He stepped over the rim's edge into the low pool, shivering at the water's touch, at the numb languor that crept up his legs. Then, without further thought or gesture, he bent and slipped himself beneath the surface, to lie in the shallows of the fountain, his body cradled in its bowl. The Golem ran. More than 60 city blocks lay between her and her destination, and already the sun was crowning over the East River. A few hours earlier, she could have raced in the dark, silent and anonymous. In the daylight, she would be noticed, remarked upon. The Golem found she did not care. She ran, rooftop to rooftop, through the old German town tenements, the East River hard on her right. Waking men squinted at her approach. She heard their cries of surprise as she ignored the narrow plank bridges and vaulted over the alleyways below. She dodged chimneys, clotheslines and water towers and counted the blocks. 9, 10, 11, 12. Time slowed as she pushed herself. 20, 21, 22. Union Square fell behind her, then Madison Square Park. Where would he be by now? 59th Street? On the carriage path? Was it already too late? She ran faster, trying to keep focus. One misstep at this speed will spell ruin. The wind was a high, thin cry in her ears. Children stared from upper windows and would later tell their friends they'd seen a lady outrun the elevated. 38 blocks, 39, 40. At last she could see the park, a distant square of green flashing between the buildings. She clattered down a fire escape, startling sleepers on the landings. And then she was running across the avenues, a plain-dressed woman who dodged the morning traffic like a fish navigating a shoal. A trolley rushed around a corner. At the last moment, she darted past it, ignoring the incredulous fears of the riders who'd seen her coming at them like a cannonball. She was across 59th. She was inside the park. She raced up the carriage drive and then the broad, tree-lined path, feeling the growing things all around her, adding their energy to her speed. Ahead of her, a man in threadbare clothes staggered upright from one of the benches, pressing a careful hand to his head. He straightened, blinking a newly bruised eye, and gaped as she ran past. Down the stairs, through the arcade, and across the terrace. And even before she was at the fountain, she could see him there, curled like a sleeping child beneath the water. Ahmad! She jumped the edge of the fountain and plunged in, hooked her arms about him and dragged him back over the side. Water sluiced from his clothing as she laid him on the brick. He was cold and pale as smoke, and so horribly light in her arms, as though his substance had evaporated. Frantically, she tried to dry him, but there was nothing to hand, only her own clothes, already sopping wet. "Ahmad, you have to wake up." There was a man at her side, gripping her arm. "Leave me alone," she cried, shrugging him away. "I'm trying to help you," came the shouted reply in Arabic. Saleh's head was pounding. He winced, scolding himself for not realizing that Djinni would try something like this. Had he thought to simply talk him out of whatever plan he'd concocted? And why, for heaven's sake, was he helping a strange woman save the creature instead of simply turning around and going home? Surprisingly, the woman seemed to understand Arabic. She'd moved aside and was now watching with obvious panic as Saleh cupped the Djinni's chin in his hand, turning his head this way and that. He wondered who she was, how she'd known where to find them. "Leave it," his mind whispered as he examined the too pale face, felt the chest for a hint of warmth. "Just let the troublesome creature die." "Who are you?" asked the woman. "Dr. Mahmoud Saleh," he muttered, and pried open one of the Djinni's eyes. There, a spark. Bare and faltering, but undeniable. "He's still alive," he said. The woman cried out in relief. "Not just yet," he said. "He's nearly gone." "He needs warmth," the woman said. "A fire." She began a frenzied search of the horizon, as though she might find a handy blaze nearby. Warmth. Fire. A memory came to Saleh, tinged with ghostly colours. He saw a frost-covered garden, a gigantic mansion of stone set with innumerable gables, and, resting above them, 4 chimneys that puffed grey-white smoke into the winter sky. "I'd appreciate it if you called on Sophia Winston and conveyed my apologies." "I know a place," he said, "but we'd have to carry him." At this, the woman scooped the Djinni into her arms, so easily he might have been a sheaf of wheat, and Saleh began to suspect that he was dealing with not one troublesome creature, but 2. "Dr. Saleh," she said, "how quickly can you run?" Chapter 27. On the edge of Chinatown, in a holding cell of the city's 5th precinct house, an old man lay motionless, sprawled on the soiled floor. The officer on duty squinted through the bars as he made his rounds. The old man had been brought in unconscious a few hours before, and he still hadn't stirred. Tiny glass shards powdered his face. His beard and pate were scabbed with blood. "Filthy anarchist," the lieutenant who dragged him in had said, planting a boot in his ribs. But he didn't look like an anarchist. He looked like someone's grandfather. Various cellmates had come and gone over the hours. A few had tried to pick the old man's pockets, but found nothing worth the trouble. Now he lay alone, the last loose end of the overnight shift. The officer unlocked the cell door and opened it, leaning on the hinges to make them sing. Still the old man didn't move. The light was dim, but as he approached, the officer could make out the rapid rolling of his lidded eyes, the clench of his jaw. His fingers were twitching in rhythmic spasms. Was he having a seizure? The officer took the nightstick from his belt, leaned down, and prodded one shoulder. A hand shot up and grabbed his wrist. The human mind is not meant to house 1,000 years of memories. At the moment of contact with the Djinni, the man who'd known himself as Yehuda Shalman had burst apart at the seams. He became a miniature Babel, his skull crowding with his many lifetimes' worth of thoughts in dozens of warring languages. Faces flashed before him, 100 different divinities, male and female, animal gods and forest spirits, their features a blurred jumble. He saw precious gilded icons and crude carved busts, holy names written in ink, in blood, in stones and coloured sand. He looked down, saw that he was clothed in velvet robes and carried a silver censer. He wore nothing but chalk, and his hands were clutching chicken bones. The facts of Shalman's life began to break apart. His yeshiva friends came to class in silks and soft slippers, mixed their inks in bowls of jade. A prison guard stood above him in a monk's robe and hood, wielding a knotted scourge. The baker's daughter turned dusky and black-eyed, her cries like the rolling of an unseen ocean. His father lifted him from a wooden cradle. On the man's wrist was an iron cuff, tightly fitted. His mother took him in her arms, put him to a breast of clay. Yehuda Shalman thrashed in the current, choked, and went under. In a moment it would be over, but still he fought. Blindly he reached out, and his fingers closed on a memory that was his, and his alone. He was 19 again, and dreaming. There was a path, a door, a sunny meadow, a grove of trees in the distance. He took a step, was seized and held. A voice spoke. "You do not belong here." The old rage and grief rekindled, as fresh and painful as they had ever been, and turned to a burning lifeline in his fist. He broke the surface and gasped. Inch by agonizing inch, he battled the current, setting his memories to rights. The silks and slippers fell from his classmates, the robes from the prison guard. The baker's daughter regained her sallow skin and hazel eyes. He reached his own first memory and kept going, back to the self before him, and then the one before that. He travelled each life from death to birth, watching himself worship gods and idols of every stripe. In each life, his terror of judgment was all-consuming, and his belief absolute. For how could it be otherwise when each faith gave him such powers, allowing him to conjure illusions, scry futures, hurl curses? His own singed and stolen book, the source of all his wonders and horrors. Never once had he doubted that it was the knowledge of the Almighty, the one before whom all others were mere graven images. Did its efficacy not prove that the Almighty was the supreme truth, the only truth? But now he saw that truths were as innumerable as falsehoods, that for sheer teeming chaos, the world of man could only be matched by the world of the divine. And as he travelled backward, the Almighty shrank smaller and smaller, until he was merely another desert deity, and his commandments seemed no more than the fearful demands of a jealous lover. And yet Shalman had spent his entire life in terror of him, dreading his judgment in the world to come, a world that he would never see. The further back he went, the greater his anger grew, as he watched all his previous selves toiling in their frightened and fervent delusions. Faster and faster his lives rewound, until at last he reached the source, the mouth of the torrent, where there sat an ancient, filthy pagan named Wahab ibn Malik al-Hadid. The two men regarded each other across the centuries. "I know you," said Ibn Malik. "I've seen your face. You dreamed of me, said Shalman. You saw me in a shining city that rose from the water's edge. Who are you? I am Yehuda Shalman, the last of your lives. I am the one who will set things right for all my lives to come. Your lives? Yes, mine. You were merely the beginning. You bound yourself to the Djinni without realizing the consequences, and yourselves died time and again, never the wiser. I was the one to learn the secret. Much good it will do, Ibn Malik said, when you die in your turn and the secret is lost. I will find a way, said Shalman. Perhaps, perhaps not. And the Djinni, what of him? His kind are long-lived, but not immortal. When he dies, we die as well. Then he must refrain from dying. So you think to recapture him? Be certain this is not beyond your limits, as it was yours. The dead eyes narrowed. And what are you but myself, dressed in strange clothing and speaking another tongue? I am the sum total of 1,000 years of misery and striving. You may have given us this broken immortality, but I will be the first to die without fear. Ibn Malik snarled in anger, but Shalman was faster. A hand lashed out and caught Ibn Malik around the throat. You cost me any chance at happiness, Shalman said. Ibn Malik writhed around his fist. I gave you boundless knowledge instead. A poor second, said Yehuda Shalman, and squeezed. The slop bucket stench of the cell greeted Shalman as he woke. His ribs felt bruised and his face burned with tiny cuts. He tried to get up, but a man in a police uniform was collapsed on top of him. Black blood ran from the man's ears. Wisps of smoke rose from his torso. Shalman realized he was holding the man's wrist. He dropped it and wrestled free. The door to the cell stood open. Beyond it was a dank corridor and then the precinct house. He whispered a few words and walked unseen past the handful of officers yawning at their posts. In a moment, he was out the open door. Quickly, he walked toward Chinatown's eastern border and the sheltering house beyond. His mind still ached with the press of memory, but the threat of dissolution had receded. For the moment, his former selves lay quiet, as though waiting to see what he would do next. How are y'all doing? Oh dear. Everybody okay? Everybody's very quiet.
Kind of like, I thought so at the start, like I thought that the wizard who trapped the Djinni and that Yehuda Shalman might be the same person, but then the time periods, but I never really let go of that. And I was like, I don't know. I'm like, yes, self-validating.
Yes, yes. Two creepy old men are one creepy old man.
Or 100 creepy old men were really one creepy old man.
It's true. He's thousands of creepy old men in a trench coat. Oof. Gross. Crunch. So nearly at the end. Only 2 more nights. We don't have to finish it, you know, if you're not enjoying it, we could probably just leave it there.
No, we must finish it now, because how else will we ever survive?
Yeah, you're not to go to sleep till you finish it. Or
Should we say goodbye to the catch-up crew and then just keep reading?
Yes.
Catch-up crew, we wouldn't do that to you.
You could still be asleep by 1 though.
That is true. Should we just power through and have like 3 nights off? I'll spend the next 3 nights in bed. Oddly tempting. No. We have plans. We have plans. And I couldn't do that to Gordon anyway. That would be very harsh. Oh, okay, we should say goodbye to the catch-up crew. We should say goodbye to the catch-up crew. Catch-up crew, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you are not thousands of creepy men in a trench coat. I don't think that is true. We love you.